Well, hi there. Warm welcome. You're watching Decoding Now, and I'm Meghna Deka. Well, it's the war of the superpowers. Who's the boss? President Trump or President Xi Jinping? Well, Donald Trump calls himself the deal maker. Xi Jinping is a dictator who wants to be seen as a statesman. But when the world is forced to choose, who comes out on top? Well, we are going to be decoding a massive global survey which has been done by an independent American think tank, Pew Survey, spanning across 42,000 people across 36 countries, throwing up very fascinating verdict. China's global image has now climbed to a record high of 25 of those 36 nations which have been surveyed. Xi Jinping is now preferred over Donald Trump. But why? Well, we're going to be telling you. Also, Pakistan's embrace of China is hardly surprising for anyone. But India's verdict is far more nuanced, with a majority expressing greater confidence in Trump. So is Beijing quietly winning the battle for the global influence? Is America's soft power slipping away? And what does China's rise mean for India's strategic future? Well, tonight on Decoding Now, we are going to break down the numbers, decode the geopolitics, and ask the big question. As China's influence grows, what is India's next move? But before we tell you the latest of the Pew survey details, let's first tell you through the latest flashpoint which has happened between President Trump and Xi Jinping. In a dramatic address, the US president has leveled a series of explosive allegations against Beijing, accusing China of attempting to influence the 2020 presidential election and claiming that the American public was deliberately kept in the dark. Listen in for yourself.
The documents cover 5 major areas of concern. First, they show that over a period of years, starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history, resulting in China's illicit acquisition of 220 million U.S. voter files. That information includes names, addresses, phone numbers, political party preferences, and other sensitive data that would be needed to register to vote and engage in other nefarious activities, which is exactly what was happening. This data loss presents an unprecedented election security nightmare. Members of the deep state, very, very famous group of people, in many cases, in our intelligence agency work to actively suppress and downplay information about the extent of China's sinister election meddling.
Well, Beijing, of course, has wasted no time in pushing back. China has categorically rejected every one of President Trump's allegations, insisting it had never interfered in U.S. elections and never will. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has reiterated that Beijing strictly adheres to the principle of non-interference, calling U.S. presidential election an internal American affair, whose outcome was decided solely by the voters of American people. The question, however, is why is it right ahead of the midterm polls, President Trump is blaming, almost in a way, China for his defeat in 2020? Well, those are questions we may not know. But before we dive into what the Pew survey really reveals, first let's understand how this survey was conducted. Well, the survey covered 36 countries, gathered responses from over 42,000 people between February and May this year. The findings come from the Pew Research Center, a US-based non-partisan think tank known for its global public opinion research. So for decades, the United States was widely seen as the world's undisputed leader. But that perception appears to be shifting. A new survey shows that global confidence in the US president now has fallen very sharply, as the confidence in Chinese President Xi Jinping has been steadily climbing. You can see that on your screens. The red line at the bottom is China over the years, and the yellow line on top is US over the years. The gap between the two has now narrowly but very dramatically come down. As this graph on your screens will show you, since Donald Trump has taken over 2025, that's when Donald Trump took over, and you can see that bit. Donald Trump takes over, and slowly you can see how there has been a decline in the popularity of America out there. Well, this is very clearly that the confidence in China's leadership has been moving in the opposite direction. Xi Jinping has been at the leadership of this nation all throughout. It goes from 19% in 2023 all the way up to 31%. But when it comes to US in 2023, when it came to the approval rating as per the world, it was 54%. Now it's down to 21%. And the last bit, 2025, 2026, where you see the nosedive happening, was under President Trump's regime. But it's not just confidence in leaders that's really changing the world's perception of the two superpowers. It is shifting as well. Well, across 20 countries which have been surveyed by this research, favorable views of United States has steadily declined over the years, while China's image has steadily improved. So it's not just the leadership, even the nation and the whole. In fact, the graph shows that US's favorability has dropped from 58% in 2023 that you can see on your screens, and now it is down in 2026 to just 36%. China, on the other hand, has moved the opposite direction, climbing from 32% to 46%. First time in years, and this is a record high for China, first time in years, China is being viewed more positively than the United States across all the 36 countries surveyed. Well, the survey has also looked at how people perceive personal freedom in the world's two biggest powers. While neither country scores particularly well when it comes to personal freedom of the citizens, the United States is still seen as more respectful marginally of individual freedom than China is. 39% say that US respects personal freedom of its people compared to just 26% for China. At the same time, 56% of the people believe that US does not respect those freedoms, while an even higher 58% says that China does not respect personal freedom. So you can see a marginal difference in there. But here's the interesting bit. The survey also reveals where the United States is actually losing the perception battle. In country after country, China has now enjoying a more favorable image than America, even amongst Washington's closest alliance partners. For example, take a look at Canada and United Kingdom, two of America's oldest alliance partners. In both the countries, Canada, UK, and Pakistan, understandably, in both the countries, China edges ahead of the US in favorability. You can understand in Pakistan, but imagine closest neighbor, which is Canada, and UK, one of the closest allies of United Kingdom. Both of them rather pick China than US. The gap is even more pronounced when it comes to Spain and Greece. See that on your screens. Australia too gives China the advantage over America. So Australia, Spain and Greece, all of them prefer China over America. And then there is Pakistan, where China's overwhelming 90% favorability is there, far outstripping America's 15% favorability. So Pakistan overwhelmingly and understandably backs China. Well, the shift in global opinion becomes even more striking when you take a look at the exceptions. Out of the 36 countries which have been surveyed, only 6 nations still prefer United States over China. India is one of those 6, with 54% expressing a favorable view of the US compared to 32% favoring China as. In fact, you have Israel, on the other hand, remains America's strongest supporter in the survey as well, while Japan, South Korea, Philippines, all of them, Poland as well, all of them continue to give Washington the edge over Beijing because they would trust Washington more than they would trust China. But now let's take a look at the overall confidence ratings for the two leaders. Neither Donald Trump nor Xi Jinping really commands overwhelming confidence globally. But when the two of them are being compared, that's when Xi Jinping actually holds a clear edge. When it comes to Donald Trump, it is an approval rating of 23%. When it comes to Xi Jinping, it's an approval rating of 31%. So marginal, but yet it is Xi Jinping who seems to be the clear winner. So what could be driving Donald Trump's declining global popularity? His second term has been marked by a series of headline-grabbing foreign policy moves, from threatening to annexing Greenland and repeatedly calling Canada the 51st US state, to even advocating regime change in Cuba. You can see all of those listed there on your screens. But in addition to that, of course, there is threat to annex Greenland, as I was telling you, calling Canada the 51st U.S. state, regime change in Cuba. In addition to that, of course, you have sporadic blockade of Hormuz, which also happens. The next one that I'm going to be showing here, the blockade of Hormuz, is something which hasn't gone down too well either. Then there is tantrums and tariff imposition. There's capturing of Venezuela's Maduro, threat to annex Greenland, and so on and so forth. You can see the long list of problems there with the US that people seem to be facing. But what about China? Here's the interesting bit. Is China's rise India's challenge? That's the question. Because remember, when it comes to China, India views China as Pakistan's all-weather ally. Also, CPEC runs right through POK and on Indian territory. Expansionist flex in Arunachal has always been one of the biggest problems that India has had with China. Also, for India, India has given refuge for Dalai Lama, which means that the Tibet issue continues to be a sticking point. The ghost of the 1962 war continues, and the trust deficit, of course, cannot possibly be ever bridged. There is the Galwan clash, which had shattered the trust further, and you have the string of pearls encirclement of India, which is happening. And let's not forget the pitch of India, which has always been making for a free and fair trade. Naval trade. In fact, that is one of the sticking points that we have seen in the Indo-Pacific regions as well. So let's deep dive into it and check what really it means for US, what it means for Xi Jinping, what it means for President Trump, and more importantly, is this going to be one of the biggest challenges for India as well? Well, joining us today on the show, we have Dr. Brahma Chalani, a strategic affairs expert who is going to be presenting India's side. We have Professor John Huang of the O.P. Jindal Global University. Adele Nazarian is joining us, an American analyst. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show. Adele, I'm going to be starting with you first, because it appears that some of your closest neighbors as well as allies, Canada, Italy, Spain, Greece, all of them have had the biggest swings when it comes towards China away from US. Why? Is it because Trump is losing popularity, because of the expansionism, because of the threats? What's happening?
So thank you for that. Great to be on with you again and with the two guests. You know, you have to look at the poll results also to understand that, of course, you have China and other nations that are close to the U.S. There have been a lot of bombastic rhetoric in the media, which is strategic, frankly, and it's been working. If you look at the results, though, China's gains were strongest in middle income and developing countries. But the views of China remained negative in many high income nations. And we're seeing this in other nations like in Russia, right, where the people who are very wealthy, the wealthiest ones in Europe as well, who are trying to flee the country. And frankly, I have to tell you, there's this term in Chinese called "ranshui," which is basically the study of running away. They took a Western term and actually like merged it with Pinyin with Zhongwen Chinese to basically say the Chinese now, the ones who are very wealthy, higher earners, are actually leaving the country. So the fact is the internal dynamic of stability within China is actually not so dissimilar to how the U.S. is seen in some parts. It depends on the socioeconomic class you're coming from. A lot of people from the higher earning income in China are actually looking to exit the country because they don't see it as a viable economic platform anymore as what they used to do. It used to be feeling that way.
But Adele Nazarian, many would say perhaps it's because of the forever war that many have blamed Trump for. Many would say, look at global economy, because a lot of the tariffs, the tantrums, the war has put economy into a tailspin. And it's not just unfortunately restricted to one nation. It's global markets which have been suffering because of the policies.
Of course. And this is a temporary retrieve, to be honest with you. This is not permanent. We've already seen the U.S. economy bouncing back.
But needless, many have said. It was a war which was of choice.
So it is a choice, and it's very strategically different than the platform President Trump put forth in his first term. This is the complete opposite, invading Venezuela and then Iran, and next is Cuba, apparently. Yes, it's very, very, baffling for a lot of the base, but it's also going to long term be the reason why America is going to be one of the most prosperous nations and the place where everyone's going to want to be. And I guarantee you're going to see that in the next 4 years, probably, if not sooner, 2 to 4 years, I guarantee you. But I do think that, of course, in the meantime, look, it's very tough when you're trying to take this kind of a poll. And Pew, by the way, is a golden standard when it comes to polling. I don't trust a lot of other polling data. Pew is right on the money when it comes to this. But this, the reversal that we're seeing here is really less about the positive. It's more about looking at the U.S. failing temporarily, let's say, compared to how it has been historically, than China surging dramatically. I think if you look at it, you pointed to yourself, both Xi Jinping and President Trump, Donald Trump, were both not super popular in the polling data. So you're kind of looking at two leaders who are not, let's say, appearance-wise, optics-wise, doing so well. But I do find it very interesting that, Pakistan has surged so dramatically, 90% favorability for, China over the U.S., of course. And just in terms of, just to allude to what you said regarding India, I do think that China's rise is not just a challenge for India, it's the defining national security.
We're going to circle back to India because I would like to talk more on that. But before that, let me bring in Professor Huang, and it's important because we get your view as well. China, and one of the biggest problems with President Trump and US right now seems to be that the big brother is flexing muscles, gone into an expansionist flex, has been interfering in other nations, which is why the popularity is dipping. But these are accusations that China's always faced as well. Expansionism, economic expansionism, and of course, economic flex. How is China faring better?
I think there's two factors. One is because we compare like Trump and Xi, US and China. So actually, they are in the same game. But to me, the loss of the US or the loss of the Trump will be the gain of China and the Xi. So we compare them both. So if we carefully check in the last 2 years, we can find that after Trump resumed, after Trump retaken the presidency, presidentship in the U.S., we can find that actually Trump's closing the gate, closing the door to the overall the war. And Trump is also waging wars like in many places, like Iran. So every people saw these things. So that's a problem that we saw how actually U.S. used to be the global leader. So we.
But is it temporary?
Temporary is we think U.S. is losing this kind of image, and then trying to gain from there. But also on the other side, we have to see what China have done in the last 2 years. So we can find that after the end of COVID-19, China is trying to restoring the globalization, like restore air flights globally, and also China even they kind of facilitate that kind of visa to the foreigners. So I think China intentionally, deliberately to make use of this chance to attract more people to come to China to get education, to work in China. So on the other hand, China tried to expand its economy, that kind of relationship ties with other countries. And China also provide aid to many countries. If you go to Africa, you go to the Middle Asia, you can find China is providing infrastructure and space to so many countries.
Economic colonization is a term that many would use, but yes, you're right. Even as per the Pew survey, they say that the popularity of Xi Jinping may be looked at as dictatorial and expansionist, but the image of China seems to be better because it is the economic flex which seems to be working. But Brahma Chalani, I must bring you in. 90% of Pakistanis favor China. 54% of India loves Trump more. How do you read into this?
Well, Pakistan's case should be a reminder to Washington that the more you embrace Pakistan, the more you turn Pakistani opinion against the US. Because Pakistan is a country that the US has quoted for decades now. During the Cold War, the US built up Pakistan as a military counterweight to India, a role that China has taken over from the US, but the US is still very much trying to shore up Pakistan. Under two successive administrations, first Joe Biden and now Donald Trump, we have seen how Washington has helped Pakistan secure new IMF bailouts, how the US has actually modernize Pakistan's F-16 fleet to make it more lethal against India. And in return, we are seeing the love that Pakistanis have for the US. But even, look at it more, globally in terms of Pew's global survey. This isn't a surge in love for China. It's much more about the global backlash against Trump's impulsive unilateralism. The damage the second Trump presidency is inflicting on US soft power is profound and likely to outlast the administration itself. So let's be clear on one thing. This is not a temporary phenomenon, because once you damage an image, restoring it is no easy task. The concept of soft power was coined by the late Harvard scholar Joseph Nye, and it rests on three pillars: an appealing culture, political values that a country actually upholds, and a foreign policy imbued with some moral authority. Today, Trump has actually dismantled all those three pillars. So what this Pew Research survey reveals is that the more favorable rating of China is actually a lesser of the two evils dynamic at play.
Yes.
When you ask respondents...
I disagree respectfully.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I would personally say Dr. Brahmachalani's really hit the nail on the head. It seems to be, when it comes to who's the boss, Trump versus Xi, it is more about comparative. It's seen as Trump is a greater evil than Xi, at least in 36 countries that Pew seems to have surveyed. We can all respectfully agree to disagree on that. But thank you so much, Brahmachalani, for joining us. Professor Zhong Huang, appreciated as well. Adel Nazarian, as always, pleasure to have you on the show. With that, we wrap up Decoding Now.